Should we shut the door? I know. And he doesn't say, let's get started. I don't know if we should get started.
I think we are into, and no fooling, we are into the most exciting part of the session. So tomorrow is the policy committee cutoff. The Senate has passed 2 of the 3 budgets, and the House passed the operating budget last night. You're doing transportation tonight? Tomorrow. And capital is going to work its way through, so we'll pass the capital budget off the floor on Saturday. And so then that begins the final countdown in the last 26 days for us of trying to negotiate all of those budgets and resolve all of the remaining difference with the policy bills. It seems like nearly all of the major policy bills that we have been talking about this session are in play and are still working their way through the system. So we're watching those carefully and getting ready for a period of intense action in the fiscal committees over the next few days, and then on the floor starting a week from tomorrow, I guess, for that last part until the opposite house cutoff. So, we continue to, in a very uncertain environment, try to balance the needs of people from around the state, whether that's kids in public school or people who are depending on the state for their health care, with the significant shortfall that we're facing, and figuring out how to strike the best balance there to meet the needs of the people of the state.
And I would just add, we moved the operating budget off the floor last night, finishing up just after midnight. 7-hour debate that probably we could have heard all the same points in half as many hours, but we're happy that step of the process is behind us now, so we can move into the next phase of bringing into alignment the House and the Senate budgets and wrapping up our policy work before we get to full-time floor action.
Okay, so questions?
Okay, I'll go first. What do you expect to hear from Governor Ferguson today? I know you guys, caucuses were briefed. I mean, not detailed, but I think you have some understanding. Some folks have
the governor will speak for himself. I think obviously we're expecting to have some clarity from him about how he would like to see the budget resolved, the budget shortfall resolved.
House members are saying they had some indication yesterday. What do you expect to hear? Because you have said he showed some support or some comfort level, I think was the word, but with some of the revenue package. So do you have more clarity now?
Oh, we're not going to get ahead of the governor in terms of what his preferred pathways are for resolving the budget, but we do think that his remarks today will help clarify our next steps.
Last week, a coalition of some Washington mayors sent a letter urging lawmakers against passing a proposed payroll excise tax and a B&O tax increase. They're worried that such proposals could harm businesses and effectively drive jobs from the state. So how would you respond to such concerns?
You know, all of those cities are constantly asking us for money. They also represent constituents who rely on public schools, who rely on health care, in part funded by the state, who have kids in the foster care system, who, rely on state services. We're looking out not just for city elected officials, but also for our constituents who live in those cities. Cities have seen their costs grow to maintain their workforces. We're trying to address that. The state has seen our costs grow to provide health care for our workforces, for local government workforces, for school districts. We've seen the costs grow to, maintain qualified staff working in state government and in the creations of state government, like local governments and school districts. That's a challenge. it's challenging for us to fund all those competing priorities. And, I would like to think that those local elected officials, as folks who also have to manage a budget, would recognize the challenges and the pressures that the state is under. I would also say that one of the most significant cost drivers for maintaining a qualified workforce, whether if you're a large employer, whether that's a city or a school district or a tech company or state government, is the cost of housing. And so I would really turn the question back to those local governments. What are you doing to address the cost of housing? Because many of those places are responsible for the housing shortage that has driven up the cost of living so much in our state.
I guess I'd just add that the biggest sample size direction that we've gotten in the legislature on how we ought to strike this balance that I was talking about before between taxes and services and what kind of taxes we ought to be looking at comes in the form of the voters' rejection of the three Brian Haywood initiatives this last fall. We had large majorities of people who supported the capital gains tax. So support for progressive revenue was the strongest of any of the results of those initiatives, and they supported it. Why? Because they wanted us to make investments in public schools and in child care and early learning, right? Similarly, voters approved what was widely billed to them as a gas tax to pay for the Climate Commitment Act and the investments that go along with that, trying to reduce carbon pollution in the state. And even in the most, probably the most regressive in some ways tax that was on the ballot, the payroll tax to pay for long-term care, the voters by a pretty thumping margin approved that program, right? So I think in all of those things, with millions of, not a few dozen, right, or a few thousands that might take the time to show up in a hearing, but by the millions, voters voted and said how they want us to tackle these problems. And so I continue to believe that that is the freshest and strongest guidance that we have about how we should be resolving this problem that's in front of us.
I have a non-budget question for you guys. I was hoping you guys could talk about Senate Bill 5708, Senator's frame bill about online safety for kids. It passed the Senate, but ultimately didn't receive a hearing in the House. So just wanted to hear your reactions to the bill not moving forward, and whether you guys think it needed more time regarding some of the potential constitutionality issues and privacy concerns for kids.
I can address that. I think I was the only Democratic no vote on the Senate, and I actually flipped. I voted yes, and then I voted no. And the reason was really the constitutionality issue. This is being litigated all across the country, and I will say that given our fiscal situation, I actually think it needs to wait a year or wait until some of those other states have resolved it so we have more clear direction on where we need to go. I also say that, I think dealing with technology and trying to legislate that issue is a lot trickier. And we really need to make sure that we are partnering with the tech industry to really understand how we can go about doing it. The fundamental issue here is the funding model for social media, right? They make money when they have more eyes on their content. And so when you try to limit it, you really have to make sure you're doing it in a way that is meaningful. And I think right now there are a lot of challenges in really trying to figure out how can you actually create a culture change in determining who's watching what content, how it's being marketed towards them, and how can you verify who your user is. So I think there are legitimate problems right now, but this is a conversation we need to continue to have because this is a real problem. The content our kids are seeing, actually the content that all of us are seeing, there is so much information out there that ensures that people continue to see content that they agree with. And so you're creating silos of information. You're creating silos of what people think and constantly feeding people the information they think is accurate. And so we've gotten away from a system where people are actually learning or being exposed to diverse thought. So there's a lot out there that we have to really figure out how we're utilizing content online, how we're monitoring it, and who's getting access to it at what age.
I'm going to go back to taxes for a minute. The property tax proposal, I think there's 45,000 people or something signed in con on lifting that lid from 1% to potentially 3%, and then a lot more if it's tied to inflation. That's not just going to affect the wealthy, it's going to affect every property owner, every renter in the state. So it's not just a tax on people that are, wealthy. People are hurting right now. So why go after property taxes?
So since the formation of the state, the property tax has been the core funding for both the state government and for local governments. In fact, up until the voters approved an income tax in 1932, the property tax was the sole source of revenue for the state government. And it was the concerns of property owners that during the Great Depression that caused the Grange to support an initiative by which the voters approved an income tax. And when that got struck down, the voters had to, or the legislature came and passed the Revenue Act that then made the revenue system that we're relying on still to this day with sales tax and B&O tax. The property tax continues to be the primary source of revenue for public safety, for counties, right? Because it is roughly 2/3 of county revenues around the state, and counties have primary responsibility for the criminal justice system. For the state government's part, since the 1970s, 100% of the property tax has been dedicated to public schools. And the IMAN initiative, Initiative 747, that the voters passed, that limited the growth, didn't limit anybody's property tax bill to a growth of 1%. It limited the growth for the government of revenue from property tax to 1%, regardless of what inflation was, regardless of population growth. That is almost 100% responsible for the underfunding of public schools. If you draw a line between 2001 and what happened in 2017 when we took levy authority away from public schools and put it into the state government, which then, by the way, caused the state government to grow in a way that gets criticized because people say that state government is growing at some unreasonable rate. If you look at that delta is almost exactly the total amount that we had to put into public schools to make up for what the Supreme Court said was underfunding by the state, right? And now the same thing is happening again. We set the rate at $270 per thousand, and that has declined below $220 per thousand now for the state. And that underfunding is less than the amount that we're going to that we're trying to put in to fund special education and material supplies and operating costs. The counties are going through the same thing with their inability to fund sheriffs and police, with their inability to fund public defenders and prosecutors and courts. We cannot leave our local governments and the state government in a fundamental vice grip that is going to prevent them from doing their jobs. So, I too would love to see a world in which people who have billions of dollars are taxed fairly on their stocks and bonds. In the meantime, the tool that we're left with is the property tax, the sales tax, and the B&O tax. Those are our primary revenue tools. And so keeping one of those primary tools from an artificial constraint that forces it to grow less than inflation, less than population growth, is key to having effective functioning government.
So Washington hospitals recently raised concerns with being a part of the B&O payroll taxes, and their ability to kind of help patients with that, knowing that they would probably have to pay more. I'm curious to see whether you're looking at exempting hospitals from the B&O and payroll tax. Yeah.
Hospitals both pay taxes to the state, but they're also one of the largest recipients of state tax dollars. After school districts, hospitals are probably the largest category of entities receiving payments from the state through the Medicaid program, through Cascade Care, and through the Public Employees and School Employees Benefit Board. So we hear from hospitals both in opposition to anything that could generate revenue from them, but also in opposition to anything that could cut payments to hospitals. So it's a tough spot to be in, no question. But the reality is our budget is very squeezed right now, and we're going to have to ask hospitals as well as other beneficiaries of state payments to tighten their belts.
A couple of bills about flavored tobacco have now risen from their earlier graves. Is that ban on flavored tobacco a high priority for leadership this year? I mean, y'all have a lot going on as far as tax stuff goes. Is that another fight you want to put up, or is that something that, you're just throwing out on the table to talk it through more? I'm just wondering sort of where it lands on the list of priorities.
I think there are big revenue proposals that both caucuses have seen kind of put on the table for members to consider how they feel about them. Some of them have to do with raising enough revenue to keep and save programs that we care about and we know are important to keeping people alive and healthy. And some of them are more policy decisions. And this is one where I personally see the impact that flavored tobacco and products have on young people that I know. And from a policy perspective, I think it's the right thing to do. And if it happens to raise revenue, that's great. But yeah, there are challenges with those bills. There's a reason why they haven't passed yet. But they are policy decisions that I think enjoy a lot of support for folks who understand how marketing to children, harmful products to children, can have a negative impact on their health in the long term, which we then pay for in other tax dollars in some other form. So I think you're going to continue to see some discussion around bills that may not have been at the top level of priority when it comes to a revenue package, but are still policy things that people are interested in. I introduced a bill that taxes a synthetic nicotine for the very same reason, but there are a couple ideas like that out there that are still going to be considered.
And I agree with Rep. Stonier. I think the public health issues around our children vaping is very real, and we have to do more in that arena. And when you are handling a public health issue and raising revenue at the same time, I think that is a good policy moving forward. But we do have to take a look at the public health issues related to vaping in our children.
Senator Dingra, your bill to fund crime victim services ultimately did not make it through. There is some funding in both budgets, I think a little bit more in the Senate than the House. Can you talk a little bit, I guess, both chambers, about the funding that's in your budget? I mean, will that ultimately help? I mean, I guess what's the gap that's left that your bill was trying to address?
Thank you. I love that you brought up that bill. So the crime victim funding bill that I had was actually a way to put in statute what we do on the budget every year. We have very consistently made sure that the state makes up the difference between the Violence Against Women's Act federal funding that has been decreasing at an alarming rate. And I'll tell you, under this federal administration, I don't expect survivors of sexual violence or domestic violence or trafficking to get much help. So that bill was a way to codify it so we don't have to have our victim advocates come down to Olympia every single year advocating for this money. So the operating budget in the Senate does make that difference up. It's about $25 million, so that is in the Senate budget, consistent with what we have done every year. my attempt was to really make sure that that happens automatically instead of having advocates come down and, take time away from providing direct services and really making sure that they are working hard to make sure they get this money. So the commitment is there for survivors. I will flag a couple other things that need to be worked out. I think there was some snafu on funding for the Sexual Violence Law Center. I think in the House it was trying to move it away from Commerce to Okla, and I think somewhere along the shuffle that has to be addressed. And then I know I've heard from the prosecutors that the dollars that they were supposed to get for victim funding, instead of $4 million, it's $2 million per year, and this was related to the bill, the House bill that reduced LFOs that used to go to pay for victim services. So I think those are the two outstanding issues that I'm aware of, but the codification of the lack of WAVA funding has been made whole in the Senate budget.
I wanted to ask about parents' rights. I know the legislation in both chambers has now changed in some form, I believe. I'm wondering if you all could give us, Rep. Stonier, an update sort of on the thinking with these changes to the parents' rights stuff, and just sort of what is the strategy and what do you expect?
Yeah, you were right. Both chambers. Well, I don't think that the parents' rights, Senator Claire Wilson's bill has changed as much, but you heard me say a couple of weeks ago that we've been in communication to try and make sure we're holding tight to what we think is good policy in the end for the students and teachers and parents in Washington State. So there are some changes in the Senate bill, and we had some small adjustments in the Senate bill over in the House. So I think the answer is the same. I think we're still committed to the same outcome, and because this has been a priority for both caucuses for this session, we think it's important to make sure that each chamber has a vehicle moving so we can be sure to finish strong on this for the people of the state. We did have a robust discussion in executive session this week on Senator Wilson's bill. I think both chairs and committee members on the Democratic side in the House and the Senate have done an excellent job in the last 2 weeks of clarifying misinformation related to the bill and explaining why we're here, which is very simply that there is a misunderstanding that the passage of the initiative changed whether or not parents can have access to documents in a healthcare setting that are not governed by education policy. And now that we're at a point where we're clearly clarifying that, the debate seems to be going a lot smoother.
Are there any points in the debate that sort of resonated with you a bit more, like especially for people who are concerned about like any changes coming to this because of what they've been hearing about it? Has there been anything that you're like, have taken a closer look at in response to the criticisms?
Yeah, I think the thing that catches the most attention is really around immediate notification. As you know, that language has been on the books for a very long time. Both chambers have reassessed what that language looks like, so it's more in line with what schools actually do, which, by the way, is immediately notify parents when something is notable and something endangering their student needs to know. We had heard plenty of stories about that in the House Education Committee about all the times that we immediately contact parents when necessary. And so we've updated the language in both chambers to match what really happens in schools. I think that's one point that I would say we've updated to keep in close alignment. But I think the bigger concern for me is the rhetoric around the bill. It's incredibly offensive and frustrating to continuously have to defend our public school system. To be asked over and over again, what is it you are hiding, makes me wonder what kind of relationship people have with their public schools. Because oftentimes, when you talk with parents about it, these are fears that they carry because of something they heard online, rather than what they've really experienced in their schools, where they happen to know their teachers' names and have good relationships with them. They've had conversations with principals about concerns that are happening at school. And in some cases where the support isn't there, likely because we have a lack of staffing and training for students, for teachers to support students, we run into concerns where we know we can do better. And these two bills are an effort to deliver on that. But I would just say, the rhetoric around this bill has become So frustrating because it's about so many things that are not even in the bill. To entertain amendment after amendment over gendered bathrooms when what we're really talking about is whether or not parents have a right, and they do, to be involved in their students' school environment, it's a distraction.
I would just follow up on that with a question. I think it was McIntyre at the end of, before the final vote out of executive session yesterday on that bill, he said the problem is people have pulled their kids out, and they're still pulling their kids out. We've lost so many kids. And many parents have pulled their kids out because they don't trust the schools anymore. So is it your suggestion that those parents are ignorant, that they don't know what the schools are doing?
Absolutely not. Every parent has a right to make the best decision for their child. Those parents are potentially making the best decision they believe is right for their child, and they should do that. But you want to know what else has been happening? Enrollment in public schools has been decreasing since before COVID. As cost has gone up, people are having fewer babies. There are fewer kindergartners coming in. So our enrollment is dropping for a number of reasons. We also have a number of students who are experiencing behavioral health challenges, struggling with their anxiety to be present at school and learn in an environment where we don't have the training for making sure that teachers and paraeducators know how to de-escalate a situation and support a student who needs to regulate before they can learn. And we have a housing instability issue. So there's a number of reasons beyond concerns about whether or not a parent can trust the school system that is contributing to our drop in enrollment. And there's data to show that. I'm happy to send it to you.
Yesterday afternoon, members of the House Judiciary Committee wrote to Attorney General Nick Brown requesting information on Washington's immigration policy, specifically in regards to Adams County and local law enforcement's cooperation with federal law enforcement immigration officials. Is there any concern that the Keep Washington Working Act or other legislation in Washington could potentially disrupt federal funding to the state?
You know, honestly, it's anybody's guess what the Trump administration is going to do from day to day. I think that's one detail in a long list of disruptions of research funding, disruptions of public health funding, disruptions of education funding, just start making the long list. And if you can keep track of all of the executive orders that emanate from the White House, you're doing better than I'm doing. I think our job is to continue to protect the people who live in our state and to try to think about what's the best policy for folks in Washington. And so both with the Keep Washington Working Act and with all of the policies that we pass, we stay focused on that.
To follow up on that, a few weeks back there was concerns about federal cuts to Medicaid, how it would affect the budget, et cetera. There have been more disruptions, but there have been some actions, and now I think tariffs coming tomorrow. Is there any new information on how it might affect the budget? Are you getting any new information that we haven't seen so far that you now realize is an impact you have to deal with? Financial.
I'll just echo what Jamie Peterson said. There's no stability at the federal level. Decisions are made on a whim and recalled and changed, and there are lawsuits. We don't even know if he's following judicial orders. There's no stability at the federal level. We cannot make our budget decisions based on that level of instability. And there's a commitment in Washington to make sure that we are providing the stability that people in Washington need, that the businesses in Washington need, and making sure that the policies in the state of Washington are being enforced, because that is what the people of Washington need. So we're going to continue to be an inclusive, accepting state that looks out for each and every single person. And the federal government is a mess right now. They don't even know who they've fired and who they've kept, and what is going on with our nuclear plant and with the electric grid. I mean, it's a disaster. And so we're focused on making sure that the people of Washington are taken care of, and that is what we're going to continue to do.
I think when we see a tweet from the president or anybody in D.C. that causes uncertainty, we know that we find out a couple hours later that it's not really going to have an impact because it takes an act of Congress, and then everybody starts contacting Congress. This is why we've had record attendance at town halls. A lot of folks are asking, what is it that we are doing at the state level in response to the feds? And the answer is the same. It's that we can't keep up with the whiplash, but we know we have to have a steady hand at the helm here in this Washington and not distract people with what can happen. We can only provide guidance on what we know we can do in this state. If we were to respond with the same type of whiplash that DC offers us, we would not be able to send clear direction to our constituents that people are going to continue to have access to health care, that people are going to continue to have access to the full range of reproductive rights in the state, that our workers, our undocumented workers that are paying taxes in this state will continue to benefit from that in the services that we are able to provide. So we just have to keep that steady message that people who live and work in this state and pay taxes will continue to benefit from the services that those taxes provide. And if we can just keep saying that, it might settle the water and the uncertainty at the federal level, at least for a moment.
We don't have any secret information that you don't have about the potential impacts on Washington from federal actions, but the March revenue forecast did anticipate uncertainty at the federal level as a significant downside risk to our state's economy and to our state budget. It doesn't take an economist to tell you that the most trade-dependent state in the nation will be hurt by being in a trade war with Canada, China, Mexico, and Europe. So that is concerning. It would be concerning to me if I were, for example, an aerospace manufacturer or a apple grower or a wheat farmer, to see our biggest export partners putting up trade barriers in response to a trade war that our federal government started unilaterally. I would be concerned if I were a home builder about the increase in costs of materials to build homes. I think we are already seeing increases in housing prices and decreases in housing starts due to those increased material costs. The most direct impact that is not in the president's hands, but is in Congress's hands, and is particularly in the hands of Representatives Newhouse and Baumgartner, are cuts to health care for the poorest people in our state. And so that's where the rubber meets the road for us, is what actions Congress decides to take in terms of cutting health care. And that will have a direct impact not just on the state budget, but also on people that are counting on the federal government for their health care and for their Social Security.
Just to follow up on that, I know you guys probably don't want to think about April 28th and beyond, but...
Oh no, we are really excited.
Well, assuming you guys end on time, is there anything in particular that would happen at the federal level that would bring you back, especially given all of the whiplash and uncertainty that you know? I mean, what would those conversations have to look like?
I think we can't predict. Our job right now is to stay focused on our job, which is to get agreements on 3 budgets and send those to the governor, resolve the differences with the policy bills that we have in front of us and send those off to the governor, and then to go home and resume our citizen lives as the Constitution contemplates. If something particularly bad happens at the federal level, whether that's cuts to Medicaid or other more, cuts to special education or fill in the blank to pay for their tax decreases that they apparently want to have, then we're going to have to assess what we might be able to do and whether we have the votes for that. And so I think as long as it happens after we've enacted our budget, then there will be the normal process to react to unforeseen events and to figure out whether there's a reason for us to return and accomplish something.
And I'll just add, it's really hard to predict when you have a leader who's engaging in reckless, illegal behavior, right? Because we're constrained by his imagination, because none of this is within the realm of the law. And so I think it's very hard for us to predict what is going to happen.
I mean, it's literally somebody who muses about violating the Constitution and running for a third term.
Yeah.
So what if in a world where something that is that clear cut can be the subject of speculation, like who knows what might come out?
Isn't there something more clear and present concern, though, if the governor were to veto your tax bills or tells you I will not sign it, if your budgets both rely on billions of dollars in the next biennium? I mean, what are you doing in the background to prepare for a $2 billion hit to the budget you both just approved?
You're talking about if we were to send the governor something that, well, I think we are sign
a budget with a wealth tax.
So number one, we have lots of plans B, C, and D, right? Number two, we have been and will continue to be in regular conversations with our colleagues in the House, and those are very. I mean, I don't know what your perspective is, Representative Fitzgibbon, Representative Stonier, but like I think we are collaborating in a way that I don't think we've seen a lot of before, right? And we have a new governor, and we're all learning to work together and communicate with each other. Whatever he says, I think it's great that that's happened. He wouldn't normally be signing the budget until May 20th or something like that. So we're roughly 2 months ahead of that. We're going to have good, productive conversations, and we fully intend to give him a budget and a set of revenue bills that he will support and can sign. So early communication from him about what he wants to do is helping us achieve our goal of ending on time.
And I think we have been very clear all session that we are responding to what constituents are talking to us about. When we put out the reality of what an only cuts budget would be, we heard back in volumes how that was going to affect a person's ability to stay in their home, to stay alive, or to have access to food and services that they need in order to thrive in this state. And now that we are getting to the point where we're coming into alignment between the chambers and engaging with the governor to find out exactly what that final crossing line is going to look like, that's going to take another chapter of a body of work from the budget team. These are two sets of budget teams that have been scouring the budget for months and beyond to make sure that whatever plan B, C, and D might be, we're going to do it in the way that does the least harm if we have to make adjustments. And so that has always been the plan, but the plan has always also been to communicate with constituents about what the impact of our budget would be, however it may look. And in that conversation, folks weigh in on what kind of revenue they think would make the best sense. And it's clear, we've got lots of polling to show that there's a lot of support for making sure that this tax code in this state gets balanced. We heard a lot about it actually from the House Republicans last night, weirdly. Lots of conversations about how they understand progressive revenue would really balance the tax code. So I think the message is out there, and we just have to figure out how to, between the two chambers and the governor's office, get to a place where we do finish on time. April 28th is my anniversary, so I plan to be out of here and finding my husband wherever he may be in the state.
He doesn't need to call you back that day. Anything else?